What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be diving into the rest of the spoilers for Dominaria United. We're getting pretty close to the end of spoiler season for the new set. I think this is pretty much a good place to call it, even though there is still probably about, as of right now, based on Aether Hub, we're about 15-ish cards away from completing all the spoilers that are out there. I just think at this point, just because there's so many coming at us at a given time, I feel like this is probably going to be the last time I really cover a good chunk of them, and then probably as we get closer to Dominaria United, I'll put some videos out talking about maybe some key cards that are in the set that I do think will be worthy of crafting. But with that out of the way, let's just dive into the spoilers, as I do think it's going to be another long video of sorts, just because I think there's roughly about 100 cards since the last time I actually start recording the last one. And just in today, with it being the 24th as of recording, we have about 75 cards just in this, though there are some alternate art versions of some of the cards, so it's not as many as it may seem. But with that out of the way, let's just dive into the first one. We have our Anointed Peacekeeper. It is a 3 mana 3/3 human cleric that has an ability that when it comes into the battlefield, look at opponent's hand, then choose any card name. Spells your opponent's cast with the chosen card name cost 2 more to cast. Activate abilities of sources with the chosen card name cost 2 more to activate unless they're mana abilities. So this is an interesting card, right? Because we lose Elite Spellbinder. This kind of feels like it fits right in Elite Spellbinder's like place in mono white. You know, it's kind of one of those things you look. It kind of really only affects cards in their hand. Though it's kind of one of those things that there is redundancy to it. It's not just like that one copy. It's going to be any other copies that person would play of that card in their hand for the rest of the game. So as long as this stays out, that ability is like a static ability. So any copy of that card is going to cost 2 more to cast. And then on top of that, if it has some sort of crazy activated ability, it's going to also be taxed additional 2 more unless it's a mana ability. So this card's going to be pretty good. You're going to see probably a lot of play. I mean, a 3 mana 3/3 is still really, really good. You know, it's definitely going to, for a mono white player, this is going to be that card that they're looking for to replace Elite Spellbinder. And then on top of that, just because it doesn't have flying, it actually has still 3 toughness, which is also pretty good. So I do think this is going to be a card that's going to be overall pretty good. And like I said, it's going to probably replace at least Spellbinder in a lot of decks because it is still in the 3-drop slot. Next card up is going to be Runic Shot. It is a sorcery spell. It does have kicker of a blue, and its initial ability is to destroy target tap creature. If this spell is kicked, scry 2. These cards are very situational. They're not really good in you know, typical competitive like standard for the most part. This is more of a, you know, limited card, maybe a copy or two if you're looking to probably play like a deck that plays white, maybe even blue, that you can splash it for the kicker ability, or just in general. You know, these are very limited on what they can do. It is sorcery, so it is on the slower side, and you know, it does have very situational abilities. It's not as good as like a straight up removal spell. It is probably, like I said, probably something you draft, but not something you play. So, you know, it's an okay card, but not a great card. Next card up is going to be Haughty Jin. It is a Jin creature, which is pretty cool. Jins are pretty awesome, and they're kind of like, they're like deep in the lore of like MTG from like way back in the day. It is a flying creature that has a power of star 4. Its power is equal to the number of instant sorcery cards in your graveyard. Instant sorcery spells you cast costs 1 less to cast. So this is interesting, right? You know, we get the Phyrexian cards, which you can pay life and do Phyrexian mana stuff with. You can do other things with, you know, with that Phyrexian mana, and then combine this and make them start costing less colorless to cast. You know, overall pretty cool card. It is for 3 mana. Again, a 4 toughness card is actually pretty good as well. I do think this is actually be a playable card. You know, maybe you do this in like your Is It spells deck, just because I do think there will be some sort of deck that will play like spells of Is It and is it like this or like Azorius? There's probably a couple different options you could probably play with this card. Delver is another good deck that would probably be played with this card, just because, you know, that deck is also playing a lot of non-creature spells. So it's definitely, I think, a good card. I kind of can't wait to experiment with this and kind of see how overall powerful it is. It's kind of one of those things that will start off pretty slow. It does block pretty good. But as the game goes on and you kind of get more and more spells in your graveyard, it can definitely, you know, take off and, you know, start hitting your opponent for big damage in the air. Next card up is going to be Drag to the bottom. It is a 4 mana rare sorcery that has domain. Each creature gets -X and end of turn, where X is 1 plus the number of basic land types among lands you control. So this is definitely a card you're not going to play in a mono black deck, as it would only really get -2/-2 for 4 mana, which does not seem that great, as that would be it's a better place to do Meathook Massacre, because Meathook Massacre scales with your mana you have. So this is not going to replace like a Meathook Massacre. Though I would say if you're playing like Golgari, or maybe try to play Soul Tie or some other 3 combo kind of, control style deck, this could be the card that fits in that deck, just because you have 3 different basic lands out. If you have a Triome, that's 3 basics right, or 3 land types right there. So then this would be a 4 mana, give everything -4/-4 until end of turn, which is actually much better. I don't know if there's going to be a 4 or 5 mana card deck that would really exist, just because pain lands are kind of hard to kind of make that style of deck work, especially with losing pathways, and having to pay mana to cast spells of various colors is definitely very taxing. So I would say at best this is going to be a card you're going to see in a 3-color deck, and -4/-4 is not that bad. And then on top of that, if we do get any other sort of other dual lands that aren't pain lands that maybe help 6 mana a little bit differently, this card could get a lot better, just because then we don't have to pay pain lands. We can still pay basics and stuff like that. So I think overall pretty sweet card. It's definitely like an alternative to Meathook Massacre, though it's not going to completely replace Meathook Massacre in the format. Next card up is going to be Loon Battle Him. It is an instant uncommon spell that costs 3 mana. It has kicker of white mana. Its ability is that it deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If the spell is kicked, you gain 4 life. So 3 mana, deal 4 to target creature or planeswalker, cast 4 mana, you also gain 4 life in the process. It's not a bad card. It's not a great card, though. It's a little expensive, as I feel like when you start getting to like anything above 2, you kind of want it to have kind of like the any target ability. I know it's an uncommon. And then on top of that, the 4 mana ability is, it's okay, but not great. It's definitely something, maybe it sees something in like Boros, but I don't really see this as being a super powerful spell, as I do think playing like things like Lightning Strike, Play with Fire are just overall much better at being in a common slot. And I don't think this would take place or replace any cards that you would want to probably play at the 3-drop slot, possibly even 4-drop slot. So probably more of a limited card as removal, as 3 mana to do 4 damage is definitely pretty good in limited. And then on top of that, if you do play white in that limited deck, you can then also gain 4 life at that time by paying that 1 additional mana. So not a bad limited card, but not really a great constructed card. Next card up is going to be Sprouting Goblin, as we get more goblins, which is definitely pretty sweet. It is a 2 mana 2/2 goblin with a kicker of green. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, search your library for a basic land type, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle, and then you can tap a red and tap it, sacrifice a land, and draw a card. Interesting card, right? It kind of replaces the land that you may sacrifice to the draw ability. It's pretty sweet that we get another goblin here. Also has it's kind of like I wouldn't say it's a ramp card, but it's more like a creature environmental sciences kind of card, where you, for 3 mana, you get to get a creature, plus you get to search your library for a land card with a basic land type, which is definitely pretty sweet. So if you need another green, you need another red, or you need that 3rd color that you may have not drawn in your open hand, this is kind of that card that fixes it. I don't know if it's going to be really good in like constructed play, though. If there aren't too many goblins and you're trying to put a goblin deck together, this could be a card that kind of fits in that deck type. But it's definitely a good card if you're playing in a limited that you're trying to fix your mana base, because you're trying to play like a 3-color deck for like a domain ability. This could be a card that you definitely want to add or try to pick up, because it's going to help you fix your mana as long as you have that green mana to actually kick it. So overall, not a bad limited card, but still kind of skeptical of whether or not we'll see play in constructed. Next card up is going to be Gaias Might. It is an instant speed common card that has domain, and target creature gets +1/+1 to end a turn for each basic land type among lands you control. Not really, a card you're going to see any play of in constructed, but it's definitely something that sneaks some play in like limited, just because you are maybe more vulnerable to having more basic lands, because there aren't too many, other than the pain lands, there aren't other lands that you're going to get that help you fix your mana, and those don't also count as basic land types, so you have to have a bunch of basic lands in your deck to really make this super effective. Though it is a cool little combat trick for 1 mana, it could be a possible 5/5 if you have all 5 basic land types out, but more than likely, at least it's going to be a 1 mana +2/+2 or +3/+3. So interesting card, not really highly rated, I would say, in limited, but it's definitely something you could play in limited if you are trying to play something aggressive and have a little bit of combat tricks in the process. Next card up is going to be Quarry and Beastcaller. It's a 2 mana 2/2 that whenever we cast a creature spell, we get to put a +1/+1 on Beastcaller, and then when it dies, we get to distribute those +1/+1 counters among any target of creatures we control, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Beastcaller. So a pretty good card. It's a card that will grow if you play it in your 2-drop slot, as every creature that you play after will get this card to grow, and as long as it doesn't get exiled, it will distribute those cards. So it's definitely not that bad of a card, though it's going to be one of those things like, would you rather play this, or would you rather play the 2-drop from Streets of New Capenna? That's also a 2-drop that gives you a little bit more variety, where you can get some mana, you can get some you get some treasure. You can get some +1/+1 counters. You can get some life. So it's definitely a toss-up between the two, but definitely still not a bad card overall for only being a 2-mana creature. That it does trigger on playing other creatures in your library. Next card up is going to be Rana Shieldworld's Faithful. It's a legendary human wizard creature that's an uncommon that does cost 4 mana, 1 colorless, a blue, and 2 black. That whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, each opponent loses 1 life. You may cast Rana Faithful from your graveyard by discarding 2 cards in addition to paying its other costs. So interesting card here. It is a 3/4 for 4 mana, not that bad. It's kind of unique that you could possibly play this in like your control deck, and as you kind of use like a Dimir control deck or maybe even Sultai or some sort of 3-color control deck, you can play this card, and every instant or sorcery you do play that, for the control and stake, you're going to drain your opponent in the process, which is definitely not a bad, overall play. On top of that, you can also discard 2 cards and pay the additional 4 mana, get it back from the graveyard to play, and it's not at sorcery speed, so this is something you can do at end of turn. Which makes the card pretty decently useful. So if you do have a bunch of lands or cards you don't really need in the matchup, you can always discard them, get this card back from the graveyard, which is definitely not bad. Outside of that, I would say it's more of a limited card, though I could see you playing it in like Constructed if you're a little bit more on a budget, which, the drainability is definitely not that bad. But still, it's a pretty decent, powerful, 4-drop card for limited, just because it makes every instant or sorcery after you play this card that much more powerful, because not only is it going to do the effect of the instant or sorcery, it's also going to outright, drain your opponent for 1 life, and you gain 1 life in the process. Next card up is going to be vanarvodian Desecrator. It's a legendary creature that costs 2 mana. It is a 1/2 uncommon. Its ability is that you can tap it, draw a card, then discard a card. If you discard an instant or sorcery card this way, each opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life, which is actually not that bad. And then on top of that, you can pay to sacrifice it. You may cast a target instant or sorcery card from graveyard this turn. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile instead, activate it only as a sorcery. So, it's pretty versatile in what it's trying to do here. It's kind of one of those cards that you can get rid of spells that maybe you don't really need at the time, and then later down the road, if you say you need that, draw spell or counter spell that you may have already, cast, you can sacrifice this and exile it, and then actually play it, which is definitely not that bad. Now I realize it says activate only as a sorcery, so actually you can't play a counter spell, but you can, play any other spell that would be at sorcery speed, which could be effective, which isn't terrible. Only costing 2 mana is also not that bad, so it's definitely cool there. It's also Merfolk, and as I've kind of seen some other things, there are some Merfolks also in this set, so it's definitely cool to see some additional Merfolk added to the overall set. So not a bad card, but it's gonna be interesting to kind of see where this plays out. Could be played more so in limited, but it's definitely something maybe could make its way into some sort of deck in Constructed. Next card up is gonna be Jodas Codex. It is an uncommon artifact that costs 5 mana. It has the domain ability of 5, and tap it, you draw a card. This ability costs 1 less to activate from each basic land type of lands you control. This one is, I get it, but it's not great, right? 5 mana to get a card that will eventually draw you cards for less mana is okay, but I think that the fact that it's 5 mana straight up, I get it because it's a book that you're trying to play 5 colors. It doesn't make it actually any sort of usefulness. I think this is actually one of those rares that you may, if you are one of these uncommons that you would draft and just kind of throw it in your sideboard and probably not play it. The draw ability could be good. I just don't see in it, if you're playing 3 colors, you're then spending 7 mana to draw your first card, essentially, because the first time you play it, you have to have 2 mana open, possibly, and then you can draw a card. If you don't have more than 2 colors, and it costs still 3 to draw a card, and I do think there's some other effective spells you could possibly play in this, this actual set that you could probably do better with for about the same mana. So overall, it's kind of a very meh uncommon, but it's kind of cool that it's kind of one of those domain artifacts that kind of gets some benefit if you play multiple colors. So interesting, but not really that great of a card. Next card up is going to be Dontthas Benial's Hope. It is a 5 mana legendary creature, human knight creature. It's got a ton of abilities as a first strike, vigilance, lifelink, and then whenever it enters the battlefield, you may put an aura or equipment card from our hand onto the battlefield attached to her, which is definitely interesting. So white's going to get some ways to kind of cheat some stuff out in addition to her. If this could be one of those things where you may have like the 1 mana equipment that gives target creature +1/+1 in haste, which actually isn't that bad, so you can attack with this in immediately, and it doesn't cost you any additional cost, which is definitely pretty sweet. Though we do lose some key equipments overall that I would say, like, Maul, the Skyclave Maul and stuff like that would be leaving, so you can't give it like flying on top of this, which would definitely make the card really, really good. But still not a bad card, I would say. I do think there's going to be some sort of equipment deck out there, as this is not the first card I've seen in this set that has some sort of ability that kind of, synergizes well with equipments and or auras. So definitely a cool card to kind of mess around with if you're trying to play a deck that falls in one of those two categories. And it's still not bad for a 5 mana to get all these other abilities on top of it. The fact that it has First Strike, the fact that it has Vigilance, and the fact that it also has Lifelink makes it a very good overall card to have on the battlefield to kind of maybe, depending on whatever equipment or you play, makes it overall super good. It's definitely, I would say, a pretty good card to play in like draft, just because I do think those 3 abilities are really good and very strong, especially in a draft format. But definitely see where this card shakes out when it comes to constructed overall. Next card up is going to be Sten, Paranoid Partisan. It is a 2 mana legendary creature human wizard. When it enters the battlefield, we get to choose a card type other than creature and or land. Spells we cost of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. Which is definitely overall already pretty good. If you're playing this, you're maybe playing like a blue-white control deck. Maybe you're playing Selesnya, like a Celes or an Azorius, like a creature deck, like with additional non-creature spells. And then making all those non-creature spells cost 1 less to cast, like whether you choose instant or sorcery is pretty good. And then on top of that, you can tap 3 mana, a colorless, a blue, and a white. You exile it, return to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So it's kind of one of those things where you can, protect it by, paying 3 mana. You can also make it enter the battlefield again and rechange up whatever that card type you chose when it initially came out to a different one, which is actually not that bad. You can attack in with it and then untap it by paying the 3 mana. So it's definitely a pretty versatile card. I do think, this is yet again another card that has some cool flicker ability, and it does have a pretty decent enter the battlefield ability to kind of take effect of that. So overall, pretty cool card. Definitely something to mess around with and maybe see what kind of weird tricks and loops you could probably do, or make certain spells or things in your deck overall cost cheaper. So a pretty cool card overall. Next card up is going to be Ival, Gleeful Spell Thief. It is a 2 mana creature that is a 2/1 flyer that whenever a player casts a spell that targets only a single creature other than Ivy, Gleeful Spell Thief, you may copy that spell, and that copy targets Ivy. So it's interesting, right? This is kind of one of those cards that would have been pretty sweet in like some sort of Magecraft deck from the prior, or before this set comes out, from current standard, I would say. It's definitely one of those things that if you could maybe play like a Bant, Bant kind of Magecraft deck, or Bant kind of pump deck where you play a Loon Battle Him and stuff like that, where it gains benefits of when you target it with a spell. You combine this with a Drake. I definitely see some cards that will gain some added benefit. You give one creature like +2/+2, then all of a sudden this gets +2/+2, and then all of a sudden you kind of get that Magecraft effect without actually having Magecraft ability. It's definitely it's a card that's very vulnerable as well, though. It will only have 1 toughness, so it's definitely a card that can get spot removal. But 2 mana, 2/1 flyer that has some kind of benefit ability if you're playing a deck that kind of plays a lot of pump spells, or plays spells that target creatures that you control to get some sort of effect out of. Definitely a cool card, none the least. I would say that's definitely a card that could be good in those kind of decks. And it's still not bad for 2 mana, I would say. It's not like they're making it like 3 or 4 mana and then having this ability. It's a card that fits pretty well in a lot of those decks. Next card up is gonna be King Darian. I'm terrible at Roman numerals. I guess that's, what is that, 43? Maybe 53. Or 58. I don't really know. But anyway, it's a 3 mana creature that's a 2/3 legendary human soldier that other creatures control get +1/+1. So it's a built-in Glorious Anthem creature, which is definitely pretty sweet. For 5 mana, 3 colorless, a green, and a white, we can put a +1/+1 counter on him and create a 1/1 human soldier creature token. Also pretty awesome. So definitely, one of those things that gives himself bigger, it gets himself bigger. On top of that, makes your team, and then you essentially, when he comes out, makes a 2/2 creature until he leaves the battlefield, which is definitely pretty sweet. And then on top of that, you can sacrifice it. Creature tokens you control gain hexproof and indestructible. So then if your opponent's trying to play some sort of direct spell, you can then sacrifice him, protect your team, regardless of whether they're the tokens or other creatures. So you do lose that +1/+1 effect. Overall, pretty cool card. I do think there's going to be maybe some token decks, and maybe combine this with like a wedding announcement. I could see that making that pretty good. So you get the +1/+1 effect from here. You get the +1/+1 effect from the wedding announcement once it reaches the last and final trigger. Overall, pretty sweet card, especially if you're trying to play some sort of token style deck that you could maybe take advantage of the effect and kind of get wide on your opponent pretty quickly and get pretty big. Pretty cool card. I think it will be pretty good in those style of decks. Next card up is going to be Tua, the Sky Knight. It's legendary creature, human knight, uncommon. It's a 5 mana creature, legendary creature that has flying. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we create a 1/1 human soldier creature token. So yet again, another card that gets some sort of trigger whenever we cast instant sorceries. Maybe there's an Azorius deck out there. Maybe there's a Bant deck out there that plays this card plus the last card. it's definitely going to be kind of interesting to kind of see where these kind of cards fall. I do think these are cards that give you some sort of value for, you know, playing them. This one's maybe more on the limited side, as, you know, this ability for what you're getting out of paying 5 mana is maybe not the greatest, but it could definitely be much better. If it was maybe something you play in constructive, it's still not bad overall, because, you know, any instant or social you play after you play this will just, you know, make your board much more, will make it a lot wider. It's, yet again, it's kind of an ability that we're not like the second spell kind of triggers that we got from a lot of the call time cards. This is kind of like you can do this as many times as you want. It does, these don't read that you can, this will only trigger once per turn, which actually makes overall these abilities that where you do a certain thing happen more often, which is definitely pretty awesome in that regard. So overall, pretty sweet card, definitely something to mess around with, even unlimited, to kind of see how much you can take advantage of. It's definitely one of those things where you want some creatures, but you also want to have some non-instant spell. You want some non-creature spells so that you can trigger the ability. So a decent card nonetheless. Next card up is going to be Zarogen, a scion of Efava. It's a 5 mana 4/4 creature that has domain. Whenever it becomes tapped, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control with toughness less than the number of basic land types among the lands you control. I actually think this is a card I did the last time, and I think I did the normal version of it, which was, I think, from a different translation. But overall, pretty sweet creature. You know, definitely a really good limited card, as I do think, you know, if you have the things with domain, you know, it's definitely one of those things that's definitely, you know, going to be really, really good. It's one of those things that if you have 3 different colors, this card will give, you know, anything with power 3 or less, you know, a +1/+1 counter, which is definitely pretty sweet. It's on trigger when it attacks, essentially, so it has to tap, and then once it becomes tapped, it doesn't, you know, it's not waiting to attack, it's when it becomes tapped. So it's kind of like a Gold Span Dragon that triggers immediately. You don't, even if it gets removed after attacking, it still will do the effect, which is definitely pretty awesome. I don't know if this is a card that's going to see any play in constructed, but definitely a good card to have in limited if you're looking to maybe play multiple colors. It's definitely a card that makes your tokens that much stronger, or your small creatures even better. So overall, pretty sweet card to say the least. Next card up is going to be a Sarah Paragon. It's a creature angel mythic, pretty awesome 4 mana creature that has flying. It's an angel, which is definitely sweet to see some supports with angels, because we are losing quite a few of them. Once during your turn, you may play a land card from our graveyard or cast a permanent spell with 3 mana or less from our graveyard. If you do, it gains when this permanent leaves or would be put into the graveyard from the battlefield, exile it, and you gain 2 life. So an angel that brings back things from the graveyard, though those things will get exiled after they leave the battlefield again. Overall, really good, because there's a lot of things that are mana value 3 or less that you can definitely take advantage of. Not just in angels, but in maybe in mono white. This is definitely something that's super powerful. As long as it stays on the battlefield, it definitely can get a lot of effects. You know, you don't have to, there are some cards where you can discard cards to give something indestructible. This is going to be one of those cards, well, I discarded that card, but now I get to bring it back because it costs 3 or less. It's definitely going to be interesting to kind of see how this card plays out. I think this is a really good card. You know, it's not like anything crazy with the creature type itself. It's a flyer. It's only 3/4 power for 4 mana, but I do think that this ability it has, I think that once during our turn that we may play, you know, a card from a graveyard, it's definitely going to be pretty awesome. It does probably mean that there will be some graveyard hate in the format, but that's definitely sweet. Good card. You know, it's definitely going to be something that's super powerful. I do think that ability is really, really good, and I can see that also having, you know, a lot of good versatility too, especially given, you know, like mono white or an angel deck, a lot of versatility of what you could play for that, its ability that it has initially each turn. Next card up is going to be a Voldalian Mindsinger. It is a 3 mana creature that is a 2/2. It has a kicker ability of a colorless and a red or a colorless and a green. Enters battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters for each time it was kicked. When it enters the battlefield, we gain control of target creature with power less than the Mindslinger's power and toughness, as long as you control it. So it's kind of like the new Minds flavor kind of card. I feel like I forget the one from D&D Forgotten Realms, but it's kind of like one of those cards. And the cool idea with this card is that it can be a card that gets pumped up and get bigger, and then you can kind of target bigger and bigger creatures with it. So definitely not a bad card. You can play it early game at 3 mana and get a card that has power toughness of 2. You can play it later game and maybe have the additional mana, maybe play for 5, get a creature with power 4 or less, or pay for 7 and get something that's power 6 or less. So definitely not that bad. Those counters are +1/+1 counters, so they'll stay on the creature until it leaves the battlefield. And it's definitely kind of a cool little mind control kind of card to just kind of get into the deck. So overall, pretty sweet card. Definitely a good card. You know, it's definitely something that you may see some play, but I don't know if it's going to be something you're going to run 4 of, but maybe something you'll definitely run a few copies of. And It is also a Merfolk Wizard, so another Merfolk, so maybe there's a Merfolk tribal deck that could be built. Maybe not just from this set, but as we get more and more cards in the new standard with the rest of the sets that come out this year. Next card up is going to be Runeville Horde Master. It's a 2-mana Goblin Lord, so awesome. We get another Goblin to replace some Goblins we're losing. Is another Goblin Lord, which is definitely pretty sweet. Whenever it or another Goblin we control dies, we exile top card of our library. If it's a Goblin creature card, we may cast that card until end of turn. So definitely a good Goblin Lord. It'll definitely be one of those things like, do we have enough Goblin Lords to support Goblins in a post-rotation standard? Definitely if there aren't enough Goblins in like standard, this is definitely a card that will be really good for like Goblins in Pioneer, Goblins in Historic. This is going to be a really, really good Goblin, as I do think its ability is pretty awesome for 2 mana. I mean, you're getting a Goblin Lord for 2 mana. It does a lot. Though, if a card gets exiled, you don't get the trigger, but it makes every Goblin that would die on your side of the battlefield get that much more benefit of, looking at the top card, exiling the top card of your library and being able to play that card, which is definitely a good ability overall. Definitely a pretty sweet card, and I'm hoping we get enough Goblin support that there will be some sort of Goblin deck that will be some sort of viable. Worst case scenario, we'll just have to play in Historic and/or Explorer, so not that bad overall. Next card up is going to be Cleaven Skyrider. It is a 3-mana 2/2 creature that has Flash. It has a kicker ability of 3, so in total it could possibly cost you 6. It has flying, and then whenever it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of attacking creatures. So unique card. It's kind of like a finisher card. It's not something that I would say would see any play in Constructed, but definitely a card that you could see kind of hopefully finish off your opponent. Put this in a deck where you have a bunch of small tokens that would attack in, so even if the tokens are very like 1/1s and 2/2s and stuff, you can then play this card for 6 mana and pretty much swing in for 6, swinging with 6 creatures, and then on top of whatever damage gets through, you can also deal the 6 damage there. Something where you can play it as a creature for a 2/2, but I would say you're probably really trying to play this. You're probably really trying to play this as a way to kind of finish off your opponent. So it's like, that's kind of where I see this card lines up. Maybe it kind of sees play if like a token deck, becomes prominent, and you want to see some sort of way to finish off your opponent without actually having to do a lot of damage. It's definitely going to be an interesting way to win alternatively, but definitely a cool card to mess around with and kind of see what shenanigans you could possibly get up to with it, but definitely probably more of a limited card than anything. Next card up is going to be Juniper Order Root Weaver. It is a 2-mana 2/2 with a kicker of green. When Juniper enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature control. So it's just a 3-mana, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature control. If not, it's a 2-mana 2/2 creature. Limited card, not really a good constructed card. I do think there's better cards that are in constructed that you could do it for the same amount of mana, or for 2 mana, and not actually have to pay the kicker, though the creature's probably a 1/1. It's an okay card, but I don't think this will see any play in constructed. It's more than likely a limited play, though it's kind of like one of those last picks you would pick in limited, as it doesn't, it's an okay card to have in your deck, but it's not really going to make or break your limited deck when it comes to playing draft and whatnot. Next card up is going to be the Battle Wing Mystic. It's a 2-mana 2/1 flying creature that has a kicker ability of a red. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, we discard our hand and then draw 2 cards. This card's actually pretty awesome. It's kind of like a very interesting card, to say the least. It's something that's okay and limited because you can play it on turn 2. It's a 2/1 flyer. Later in the game, if you top deck this is kind of one of those things where you play it, you have 3 mana available, you can discard your hand that maybe you don't have any other cards in your hand, or you just have lands, and you get to get a redraw of 2 cards. So I do think this card is definitely unique in that regard. It could also maybe see play in standard if like some sort of, is it style deck is kind of popular, as there's a bunch of cards that kind of maybe let you cycle cards from your hand into your graveyard and kind of redraw some cards. This is kind of like something that is built into a creature, so I do think that's why it's pretty good. Though, like I said, I do think this is more of a limited card, though it could see, like I said, see play in standard, but still not that bad of a card overall. Next card up is going to be the Defiler of Flesh. This is the mono blacks version of it, one of the Defilers, where it has like the Phyrexian ability where you pay 2 life, and then those spells cost black mana less to cast based on how much life you paid. It's a 4-mana 4/4 menace, so that's pretty awesome. Menace is definitely not a bad ability to have in a creature, because that means they have to force 2 creatures into a block with it. The secondary ability of it is, though, whenever you cast a black permanent spell, target creature control gets +1/+1 and menace at the end of turn. So I think that's actually really unique in that way. This could be pretty good with like something like Houndmaster. It could be pretty good for a lot of other mono black creatures, so you're trying to get them to be a little bit more powerful. Though I would say the one downside to it is, it's one of those things that only lasts until end of turn. Though you do get, you get to target whatever. It's not the creature that you exactly play, because I know mono black's not a deck that plays things with haste, or doesn't have a lot of cards that would have haste, especially in standard. It's cool to kind of see that each color is getting their own version of this kind of Phyrexian effect, which is definitely pretty sweet. I do think it's going to be a matter of how many of these decks are going to be willing to pay that much life. I would say if you're an aggressive deck, you may want to play these cards because you're trying to get in and beat down your opponent as quickly as possible, and if you can pay life to get as much cards out as possible, these are going to be those cards that are going to help you kind of push over the edge, because typically you're beating your opponent down very, very quickly, and your life total doesn't matter as much because you're trying to maybe win by turn 4 or turn 5, and you play this on turn 4, follow this up on turn 5 with 2 multiple plays back to back in a very aggressive deck. These Phyrexian cards will be pretty good overall, and I do think each of them has a pretty interesting, unique ability that I think is overall pretty decent for the color, and possibly what other cards you would play in this color. So definitely not a bad card, I would say, overall. Next card up is going to be Iota, Declares War. It has a 2-mana enchantment that has the Read Head ability. The first chapter of it is a 0/2 Thopter artifact token that's flying and named Ornithopter. So you get an Ornithopter token, which is definitely pretty sweet. Chapter 2 is number of untapped artifacts you control. When you do, it deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker. So second chapter is a built-in. If you have a bunch of artifacts, it deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker based on how many artifacts you've tapped for that ability. Definitely not bad either. And then chapter 3 is up to 1 target artifact it controls becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness of 4/4 into end of turn. Overall, it's an okay card. It's one of those things that we'll kind of see how artifacts really are in standard. There are a couple artifact decks currently out there. I think Mono Red does have one, and this could find a home in that deck because having a 0/2 artifact flying Ornithopter creature is not that bad, and having a way to kind of use your creatures as ways to kind of deal damage is also not bad in a pinch. You can skip ahead if you don't need the Ornithopter to chapter 2, and then being able to just take one of your artifacts, regardless of whether it's a creature or just an artifact that's just kind of on the battlefield, and make it a 4/4 into end of turn is definitely awesome as well. So overall, pretty interesting, uncommon. I do think it's going to find some use, but like I said, it's really for artifact style decks, so it's definitely going to be kind of interesting there. Be kind of interested to see, is this card going to be any good in limited, just because it's going to be hard to probably get a bunch of artifacts, in a draft. But I could see this seeing some play in constructed, just because, like I said, there is an artifact that does exist, and this could be a pretty sweet card to add into that deck. Next card up is going to be Elias Ilkor. It's a sadistic pilgrim, legendary creature, Phyrexian Core Cleric, uncommon. It's a 2-mana 2/2 with Death Touch. And its interesting ability is that whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, we gain 1 life, and whenever another creature we control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. So it's a cool card. Orzhov definitely has a lot of ways to sacrifice things and drain your opponent. Is definitely another additional ability here. This combined with say something like a Meathook Massacre drain is definitely pretty sweet as well. It's kind of like a Meathook Massacre built into a card in that regard. It's like you gain life when something on your side enters the battlefield. You make your opponent lose life when something on your side of the battlefield leaves the battlefield. Though it doesn't have that -X/-X ability, it still has Death Touch, so they don't want to probably really block it. Because you'll at least get 1 trigger from this if this does die. But it's still not a bad card. It's definitely going to kind of be interesting to see, these various colors where they kind of go to as we kind of get more and more cards in those colors. So definitely not a bad card to put in, say, an Orzhov deck. If you're looking to maybe do a gain and drain kind of style deck, this is definitely a card that definitely works. Also, this is another card that maybe you want to play in an Orzhov color commander deck. I would say if it would be the other way I'm thinking of this, just because it's one of those each opponent loses 1 life ability. So if you play this in a commander deck, it's definitely going to help drain your opponent that way, just because that's kind of that keyword. So you'll drain everything, drain each person for 1, which is definitely awesome. Next card up is going to be Phyrexian Espionage. It is a 3 mana with a kicker of 2 colorless and a black sorcery. We draw 2 cards if the spell is kicked. Each opponent discards a card. So 5 mana, draw 2, make your opponent discard 1. Very underwhelming. It's one of those things I feel like if it was kicked, maybe it's a draw 2, make your opponent discard 2. I would say is probably it would be the most fair even for a common. Even at that point, it's not anything super broken because you are investing 5 mana at sorcery speed, so you're not really doing anything explosive in that sense. You're probably more than likely tapping out. This is one of those cards where maybe it's a good card to draw in draft, even if you're not playing black, where you could still draw 2 cards for 3 mana, which is not bad. Maybe splash the black if you really think you need to make your opponent discard a card. But it's an okay card for limited, not a great card for constructed, just because it's kind of very flat on what it really does. Next card up is going to be Jin of the Fountain. It's another Jin. It's a 6 mana for 4 with Flying. That whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we get to choose one. Jin of the Fountain gets +1/+1 at end of turn. Exile Jin of the Fountain, return to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And then we get to also scry one. So this Jin is probably not really going to see much play in constructed because it's only a 6 mana for 4 that doesn't really have any sort of ETB effect, which doesn't make it super impressive for like more competitive standard. It's going to be a good card to maybe have in like limited because it does have some useful abilities that if you play any instances or play any sorceries, you can do any of the sorts. So you can either scry one at the end of your opponent's turn. If you're going to also draw 2, you can also, if your opponent's going to play some spot removal, maybe cast an instant or sorcery spell on something else. And then you get to flicker it and then protect it. And then on top of that, you can also cast an instant sorcery spell and maybe pump it and then pump it again because of the first ability. So it's an okay card in limited, but it's not really like a groundbreaking card that we'll see any sort of play in constructed, just because for 6 mana at that point you're probably casting the crab, just because that one's much better. This is kind of like I said, more of a limited card than anything, especially at 6 mana. Next card up is going to be Silver Scrutiny. It is a X 2 blue sorcery spell that we can cast it as though we had flash of X is 3 or less, and we get to draw X cards. So what this card essentially is what it's saying: if you cast it for 4 mana, you draw 2 cards. That for 4 mana you draw 2 cards at instant speed. You tap for 5 mana, you draw 3 cards at instant speed. You cast it for anything more than 5 mana, you're gonna be paying this on your turn, which I think makes this card actually kind of bad. You know, I do think a 5 mana draw 3 is not bad. Is it going to be good enough to make it see play in constructed? I don't know. It could see play. I feel like you want to play whatchamacallit in 4. I don't know if you want to play this in 5 in a like a blue control deck. This is a card that we'll see playing in control of some sort, maybe in one way or the other, maybe want a 1 of or a 2 of, just because there are some cards we're losing that, you know, help you draw a bunch of cards. Though I would say this card is kind of, yet again, I would say if this card was a 2 mana X and it was just, you could go do it at instant speed and it's X kind of draw ability, I would say that's fair even at rare. I would say that have that limitation of paying 3 or more to make it not instant speed. I feel like it should be flipped, if anything, personally. Like if you're doing it for less than 3, it doesn't have flash. And then if you do anything more than 3, because you're spending a lot of mana, it would have... I don't know. It just seems like a weird card design to do it this way than the other way. I'm very mixed on it. I don't really think it will see play just because I think there's better options even in the 5 mana slot. So, okay, rare, but not anything spectacular. Next card up is going to be Atomic Librarian. It is a 3 mana 3/2 construct creature that when it enters the battlefield you scry 2. It's pretty much it. It's a 3 mana 3/2 scry 2. Not anything super crazy. Probably not going to see any play in constructed. Maybe limited. Yeah, it's a card that scries. Pretty okay. Nothing super great. Next card up is going to be the Tribute to the Urbog. It is a 2 mana instant speed spell that has a kicker of 2. Its ability is target creature gets -2/-2 in end of turn. If this spell was kicked, that creature gets an additional -1/-1 to end of turn, and each instant or sorcery card for each instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. So what this card is saying is, for 4 mana, you can give a card -2/-2, and then whatever, based on how many instant sorcery cards are in your graveyard, you get that additional -1/-1 for each of those cards. So it's a very expensive removal spell. It does get around indestructible. I would say, if anything, this card is definitely going to be seeing some play in constructed, because even still, -2/-2 at 2 mana is not the worst thing at instant speed, especially in the common slot. And the upside here is that if you do have, you know, the blue mana, you do play a lot of other instants or sorceries, this card gets a little bit better. So it's an okay removal. It's not a great removal, though it's not a removal that will see any play in like constructed. Though I would say this is probably an okay removal to pick if you are playing limited with this card. Next card up is going to be Miria, the Scholar of Antiquity. It is a 3 mana 3/3 that we get to tap an untapped non-token artifact we control. We get to add green mana, tap 2 untapped non-token artifacts we control, exile top card of your library, and we can play those cards until end of turn. Interesting, right? So this kind of makes possibilities of playing green-red a possibility for artifacts, though yet again, we haven't seen too much to support where green comes in to make artifacts any better. Red's an okay color to splash with artifacts. That's because there's a lot of cards that add abilities to those artifacts. I just don't know if there's anything that's going to be in green that's going to help your artifact deck as well, unless there's more to come in this set, as well as maybe like Brothers War and the rest of, standard to come out in the next year. It's an okay card. It's something I would not go immediately craft. I could see this being a commander, possibly, just because in commander you have a lot of mana rocks, you have other things that are artifacts that you could have on the battlefield. It's an okay card in limited. It doesn't seem anything super spectacular because, yet again, it's talking about artifacts. If you don't have enough artifacts in a limited setting, this card's really just a 3/3 for 3, which is not the greatest, but it's an okay card to say the least. Next card up is gonna be it's a Bard Jimbro. I don't really know. I guess that's some weird translation, but it's a 2-mana Boros color creature that's legendary. At the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature of power greater than its power or than its base power, create a create a 1/1 soldier creature token. So this is an interesting card, right? This card's actually, I can see this card seeing play in constructed because there's a lot of cards that, especially in Boros, that grow with +1/+1 counters. And this is kind of that card that kind of goes and makes those cards that would grow with +1/+1 counters and gives you some other creatures that can get wider, which is definitely not a bad card to have. Though it's gonna be interesting to see, will this card see play in like a Boros aggro deck? Is this gonna be strong enough to fit in that 2-drop slot because we lose like Luminarch Aspirant and whatnot? I don't really know. It's definitely something to mess around with. It's definitely something I would play if I was playing budget Boros aggro, just because I do think that getting a 1/1 soldier creature token at the end of your turn, if you have a creature with power greater than its toughness base power, is definitely still pretty decent. As it just needs a +1/+1 counter, and you get the trigger every at the end of every turn. So interesting card. Kind of seeing where it kind of falls will be kind of interesting overall. Definitely something I want to mess around with in Boros aggro, just kind of give it some new cards, I guess I would say, to kind of maybe give it some added benefit, but an okay card. Next card up is gonna be Garna. It's saying aggro champ. I don't think that's really the actual translation, but it is a 4-mana 4/3 uncommon berserker legendary creature that whenever another creature we control dies, we get to draw a card if it was attacking. Otherwise, Garna aggro champ deals 1 damage to each opponent. So this is a good card, right? It has some decent upsides. It's a 4/3 for 4, which is not bad. And then on top of that, if you were to lose a card from it, if it was attacking, you would essentially get to draw a card. If it just dies, you deal 1 damage to each opponent. So this is something maybe could fit in like Anvil, because like you're sacrificing those artifact creatures whether they're attacking or not. You either get to draw a card, you get to also maybe drain your opponent for 1 point of damage. I can see this card being okay. It's definitely something that's a little more expensive. I know that Anvil deck's a little bit lower on the cost inside of everything, but still, nonetheless, I would say this is a pretty decent card to maybe experiment with, especially if you're also maybe on the budget side and you can't afford all the Meat Hook Massacres and things like that. This could be a card that maybe fills a role temporarily until you get other cards. So definitely another interesting card to maybe mess around with and kind of see how good it really is for it being just an uncommon. Next card up is going to be Knight of Dawn's Light. It is a creature that is a 2-mana 2/2 for a striker. Already sounds pretty sweet. 2-mana 2/2 for a strike is definitely awesome. If we gain life, we gain that much life +1. So another interesting ability there. If you gain 1 life, you gain 2 life. Definitely not bad either. And then on top of that, it has a mana sink ability where you can tap 2 mana, give a +1/+1 to end a turn. And we can do that as many times as we want to. This is definitely a pretty solid 2-drop to have in mono white in like our white deck that you'll be playing in limited. Definitely kind of interesting to see. Maybe this falls in like a more of a budget style deck, I would say, overall in constructed, as I do think there's some maybe a little bit more powerful spells you can play in your 2-drop slot. But for this only being uncommon and having some decent abilities, this is still, I would say it's okay overall. Definitely a pretty good budget card to play if you're looking for just something to fill a 2-drop slot hole that you don't have the rares or mythics to craft something that could fill that role. Spending uncommon on this is definitely not that bad, I would say the least. Next card up is going to be Love Song of Night and Day. It is a read-ahead enchantment for 3 mana that has Chapter 1, where you would, you and target opponent each draw 2 cards. Not really that great. Never want to give your opponent any sort of card advantage, so I feel like that's an easy skip. Chapter 2 is create a 1/1 bird creature token with flying. Still not really sold on this so far with the 2. And then Chapter 3 is put a +1/+1 counter on each up to 2 target creatures. So not really good, I would say. That the Chapter 1 really throws me off. Only getting a 1 bird token for Chapter 2 seems weird. And then for 3 mana, given a +1/+1 counter and up to 2 target creatures doesn't seem worth it, personally. maybe sees play in limited. Not really going to see any play in constructed. I just think it's too much, even compared to the other uncommon for red. Red costs 2. I think red just overall has better ones. I know there's other ones I think I've spoiled before that are cheaper or do something a little bit more beneficial. I just think ever giving your opponent any sort of advantage, even if you're getting an advantage out of it, is never a good thing, especially in constructed. So definitely not something I would probably play a ton of. Next card up is going to be the Umburial Priest. It's a Phyrexian human cleric that has a kicker ability of a colorless and a black. It has lifelink, which is definitely pretty awesome. If the spell was kicked, target creature from our graveyard to our hand. It's kind of just a tap 4 mana, get something back from the graveyard to your hand. I would say this is a limited card. Maybe sees playing constructed, but not really sold. You know, paying 4 mana for an okay ability is okay, but it's not really anything super spectacular that it's really worth to pay that and only get a 2/3 out of it. Like if it was only 3 mana, like it was 1 additional black to maybe do that, I could see that happening and make it a 2/2 to make it a little bit more balanced. I don't know. I'm just not sold when you take a card and you have to pay like almost double the amount to get an okay effect out of is being anything good. So this card's probably, like I said, strictly limited, not really anything constructed related. Next card up is going to be Valiant Veteran. It's a 2 mana 2/2 that gives other soldiers we control +1/+1. Okay, so there's a lot of soldiers I think you could create, so definitely not bad there. It's also not legendary, so you can have as many of these you want on the battlefield, and itself is a soldier, so it's a soldier lord essentially. It's a 2/2, which is definitely awesome there. And then for 5 mana, you can exile it from our graveyard, and you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each soldier you control. So if it ends up dying, you can, like, at last minute give all your soldiers +1/+1 counters until end of turn. So this card's pretty decent. It'll be kind of interesting to see how effective soldiers are as a tribal type. Just because, you know, there are a few, I think, in other sets that have been released before this, though I would say a bulk of them will come from this set, so it's just a matter of how powerful soldiers will be. And it only costs in 2 for a 2/2 that gives other things +1/+1 is definitely not that bad. It's an okay card. Like I said, it'll kind of be interesting to kind of see how soldiers play. Definitely something I'll experiment with, kind of see how a soldier deck could work and see if this card's going to be like, I would say that 5 ability is kind of like that finisher. If you maybe have one of these out, or maybe you have, you know, one of these in the graveyard and you go for a big attack, you can just give everything +1/+1. Maybe your opponent just sees you, maybe your opponent only has enough to, you know, Meat Hook Massacre for just enough to kill all your soldiers, but this kind of, you know, cheats out, gives them all +1/+1 so they actually don't die to a Meat Hook Massacre. You know, it's a cool card. Definitely a cool card to mess around with. Next card up is Negate. So Negate's reprinted. Awesome. I think it was rotated, and I guess they were just like, nope, we're just gonna reprint it. So, you know, Azorius control, any control decks that would play Negate, you get a Negate back. Awesome. Next card up is going to be Vesuvian Diplomacy. It is a 4-mana enchantment that whenever we cast a spell that targets only a single artifact or creature we control, create a token that's a copy of that artifact or creature, except it's not legendary. Yeah, this card is going to see some interesting plays. You know, it's definitely one of those things that I could see played in like those decks where you're targeting your creatures with a spell. And the fact that you then get to create a copy of that artifact and or creature with that effect is definitely pretty interesting, right? For 1 mana, you get 2 copies of the same creature, which is definitely pretty sweet. It's kind of like the ability for zombies in a way, but it really uses the utility of the spells you play to target your creatures with. So cool card. Definitely something, yet again, I'll mess around with. Definitely kind of see what shenanigans you could do by trying to play like some sort of pump deck that plays this card on top of like Illuminancers and, you know, Ledger Shredders and things like that, and definitely kind of see how crazy and outlandish the game could go. Cool card to mess around with, I would say the least. Next card up is going to be Voldalian Hexcatcher. It is a 2-mana 1/1 Merfolk that has Flash. It gives all your other Merfolks +1/+1, and then you can sacrifice a Merfolk and counter target non-creature spell unless the controller pays 1. Yeah, so I would say this is, I'm sure people who played like Merfolk in like all the older formats are probably pretty excited for this one, because I do think this is actually a pretty good Merfolk for 2 mana. It's going to be interesting to see if we have enough Merfolks in Standard, though, to make this card playable in Standard. So, cool. I can't wait. You know, I love tribal decks. I love, you know, messing around and seeing what tribal decks are working. I just don't know if I've seen enough Merfolks or other tribals in, you know, Dominaria that will be able to be played in some sort of competitive way. So definitely something to check out and kind of see how it develops overall, you know, as Standard develops. Next card up is going to be Braid's Nightmare Return. Another uncommon enchantment that has the read head ability that has the ability of, you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, each opponent discards a card. That's interesting. Chapter 2 is return target creature card from a graveyard to our hand. And chapter 3 is target opponent may sacrifice a non-token permanent. If they don't, they lose 2 life and you draw a card. Yeah, so this is like the Braids effect, but in a saga. I don't know. It doesn't seem anything super crazy. Like, I feel like if you play this on turn 3, maybe you don't have enough creatures to really sacrifice. You know, we lost things like Eye Twitch. We lost things like Shambling Ghast. That chapter 1 doesn't really feel great to make your opponent discard a card for 3 mana. Chapter 2 is okay, and chapter 3 is yet again okay. Maybe your opponent may be able to just be like, okay, I'll lose 2 life and you get a card out of it, like big whoop-de-doo kind of thing. Maybe limited card. Not really seeing it constructed whatsoever. Just doesn't. It seems very underwhelming. Next card up is going to be Extinguish the Light. It's an instant speed spell that has destroy target creature or planeswalker. If its mana value is 0 or less, you gain 3 life. This is an okay removal spell for 4 mana in limited. Not really good in constructed. You know, it's definitely, you know, can hit anything. Its added benefit is if it's anything 3 or less, you gain another, you know, 3 life out of it for 4 mana, which is definitely not bad. Yeah, just a okay removal spell to have in limited if you're drafting black in limited. Next card up is going to be Forex and Razor. It is a 3 mana 2/2 that when it enters the battlefield, we draw a card and lose 1 life. It's okay. Even in limited, it's really okay. 3 mana for draw a card and lose a life is decent, but not anything spectacular. So definitely a cool card, but not anything like that would blow me away that if I saw this in my draft pack, I would be like, oh my god, I gotta draft that. It's probably more of like towards the tail end. If I'm playing that color, I'll probably pick it up. Next card up is gonna be Shield's Restoration. It's a 4 mana sorcery spell that has kicker of 3. That's 2 white, 2 colorless, and a white. Then we get to return our card from our graveyard to the battlefield. If the spell is kicked, we gain life equal to that card's mana value. Otherwise, you lose that much life. 7 mana, 7 mana reanimate kind of spell. It's kind of steep. Even for 4 mana, it's not bad. Though, you know, it's an interesting card to say the least. It depends on what you really are playing and where your life total is. You know, when you play this card, you know, to be in a position in the late game where you may not have the white mana to play the kicker, or you maybe don't want to pay 7 mana to, you know, gain a couple points of life or an effect of a card. It's definitely. I'm very mixed on this. I do think the one from Streets of New Capenna is better, where you have things at different values and then the card gets flash, which is definitely, I think overall, definitely a better card. This one's just an okay replacement, but not anything super amazing that would play this over any of the other reanimator spells that cost around the same mana cost. Next card up is going to be the Elder Dragon War. It's a 4 mana spell that it's a saga that it has the read ability of you can either do chapter 1, it deals 2 damage to each creature and each opponent, so it's a 4 mana, do 2 across the board. Not bad. You got chapter 2, which is discard any number of cards, then draw that many cards. And then chapter 3 is you get a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. So it's an okay card. I don't know if this is a card I would play over the 3 mana one from whatchamacallit. I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but I would say that one's better because sure, you don't get to discard as many cards in chapter 2, but you still discard 2, draw 2 kind of thing. You get 2 creatures out of that one copies creatures you control. This is going to be a hard sell unless you're really trying to go really heavy into the dragon theme. I feel like you're not probably playing this card over the other saga that's currently in standard that's in the 3-drop slot, as I think that one's just overall better. This one's okay. It's not anything, like I said, spectacular or mind-blowing, but definitely going to be interesting to see, you know, people try to make this work or see how powerful this will be in constructed, which is something, you know, we're all speculating on when we do these things, so definitely something we'll kind of wait and see. So the next card up is going to be the Elvish Hydromancer. It's a 3 mana 3/2 creature, elf wizard that has kicker of 4 mana, which is 3 colorless and a blue. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create a token that's a copy of target creature control. So for 7 mana, you create a copy of target creature control. Okay. It's okay. It's not anything great. Probably good in limited because you could play some big creature, play this afterwards, create a copy of that big creature, have 2 of those big creatures out, and also have a 3/2. In constructed, I feel like this is definitely something that you don't want to spend 7 mana on, as I do think there's other powerful things you could do with that mana. Maybe someone tries to make some sort of copy sort of deck, but I don't know. I think it leaves you open and vulnerable for your opponent to spot removal the card you're trying to copy with this spell. So definitely something I'm not really like blown away that we'll see any sort of constructed play for the most part. Next card up is going to be the Leaf Crown Visionary. It's a 2 mana 1/1 elf that gives other elves we control +1/+1. So it looks like we're getting some wards for the various tribals. Whenever we cast an elf spell, we may pay green. If we do, we draw a card. So yet again, I feel like, you know, if we don't get enough elves, this card's really not going to see a bunch of play. Though I think this is a good card to have in like your other formats where there's a bunch of elves to play, and then given all those elves, you then essentially cast. The ability that you can pay additional 1 and get a card effect. So it's like you play an elf, you draw a card, you pay an additional 1, you get to draw a card, which maybe replaces the elf you just played with another elf that you can then replay. It's a good lord, so it's just gonna be a matter of do we have enough support to really make the deck work in one way or the other. It's also out of all of them I've seen so far that is a double spell or double color. It's not like a colorless and a green; it's double green. So it's like hey, this is really only meant to be in like a mono green elf deck, or you're really trying to splash in another color and maybe have like a blue or whatever color there are with the elves to have the kicker ability available. It's an okay elf, but not anything spectacular. That would I at least I'm not sold on elves being like a dominant tribal currently, just like the other tribals right now in standard until we kind of wait and see if there's enough meat to really make a deck out of it. Next card up is Linebreaker Baloth. It's a 5-mana 4/5 that has the enlist ability. It can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. This is a straight up limited card. 5 mana and constructed, you want something that's a little bit more powerful. Unless it's cool and limited, just because you turn this from a 4/5 into like a 7/5 that can't be chump blocked essentially by creatures that are, you know, power 2 or less, which is really good. It's a good card for limited, but not really any card that's gonna be played in constructed. Next card up is gonna be the Mossbeard Ancient. It's a 7-mana 7/7 trampler that enters the battlefield. You gain 5 life. Limited card. It's straight up a limited card, big boomer kind of drop. Like I said, this is kind of a card you would combine with the card I brought up previously. It's good that this has trample. Overall, sweet card. You know, it's a good card for limited, not a good card for constructed, just because Titan Industries is, you know, like the rares and mythics are just so much better at this slot that you'd probably rather play those instead of this. Even in a budget sense, I probably wouldn't want to play this just because it doesn't do enough to really make it worth the 7 mana I'm invested into. So more of a limited card than anything. Next card up is going to be Tear Asunder. It's a 2-mana instant speed spell that has a kicker of a black and a colorless. Its ability is that exile target artifact or enchantment. If the spell is kicked, exile target and all permanent instead. So it's kind of like a removal spell for green in a way. It first targets enchantments and artifacts if you only want to pay 2. If you want to pay 4, you can target anything essentially with it by exiling it. Not a bad card. It's okay. It's like I said, these kind of cards where you're paying 4 mana to do this kind of effect is definitely more of a limited thing. It's kind of cool to see that you can do it in a green card, but you also have to play black in order to really get the benefit of the kicker effect. It's an okay limited card, not really a good constructed card. Next card up is going to be the Weatherseed Treaty. It's a 3-mana enchantment that has the ability of first, you search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So 3-mana ramp spell. Okay. Chapter 2 is created 1/1 green sapperling creature that token. Yet again, okay. Third chapter is domain. Target creature you control gets +X/+X and gains trample and a turn where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. You know, it's kind of one of those things. I'm kind of not sold on domain being something that's, oh my god, this effect is really crazy. Because it is a deck that you're going to need lands of all the types to really get the most bang for your buck. This is an okay kind of chapter 1, chapter 2 thing. Chapter 3 is it's okay, but it's not going to be anything great. Like the biggest it's going to be is +5/+5. Just because there's only 5 land types. So it's going to be one of those things like in limited, you know, all this is kind of good. In constructed, this is not enough to be good enough. You know, it doesn't do enough to really be super competitive. And it's going to be really hard to pull off a deck that's going to play 5 colors to really make domain that powerful, just because it's harder to play, I would say, anything outside of 3 without really risking a lot of your life points in the way the current mana base is going to be set up. Next card up is going to be Aaron Benelia's Ruin. It is a 3-mana 3/3 double white black legendary Phyrexian human creature that has menace. For a white and a black, you can sacrifice another creature. You get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature control. So this card is going to be interesting, right? This card's going to see some play. Like I said, you know, we lose things like Shambling Gas, we lose things like Eye Twitch. We haven't really seen anything in the black that we'd want to sacrifice for only 1 mana to really, you know, get that super effect out of it, or even white. It could sacrifice like 1/1 tokens that you don't really care about and give everything +1/+1. So it's an overall interesting card. It's definitely one of those things it will see a lot of play in limited. This is definitely like a, you know, for an uncommon, this is definitely a really strong card. You know, because this is like a tap 2, tap it, sacrifice like maybe one of your little small creatures you draw later in the game that really can't attack in well, and then all of a sudden you pump your team. And it's also, you can do this at the end of your opponent's turn, so you set yourself up for a big attack the following turn. So really good limited card. Not really sure about the constructed card of it. Next card up is gonna be Balmor, Battle Mage Captain. It's a 2 mana 1/3 flyer that whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn and gain trample. Okay, so it's like they're like, hey, you want to play like Is It Spells? This is kind of like that Is It Spell card that kind of pumps the team. It's not itself, it's creatures you control, so it's itself plus whatever other creatures you have on the battlefield, so it makes your team even more aggressive. It really opens you up to want to play multiple copies of said spells or multiple spells in a given turn, which if you're playing like things like Ledger Shredder, definitely not a bad card. It's an okay card. I will definitely try out like a Is It kind of style, like not, you know, Is It kind of tempo style deck. This is definitely a card that would fit pretty well in that deck. It's definitely an okay card to play in limited if you also play a balance of creatures and spells as well, so you pump your team, give a good attacks kind of thing. And the fact that it also gives them trample is definitely interesting to see because it is playing blue and red. It's not playing any green, so definitely kind of a card is a wait and see. It's definitely an okay card. I would say the least, you know, has some decent effect. I would say that, you know, benefits you in some sort of way to help you attack it aggressively. Next card up is going to be Nail of Vesuvian Diplomacy. It's a 4 mana 2/4. It has flying, it has domain. That whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we look at the top X cards of our library. X is the number of basic land types among lands we control. We put one of them on top of the library, the rest on the bottom of the library in any random order. Then if there are 5 more basic land types among them, you draw a card. Yeah, domain is going to be really hard to pull off. This puts the card on top of your library if you don't have 5 different land types, so you don't get the draw effect. So it's definitely, you know, it leave you very susceptible to you making your opponent making you shuffle if they play like a Field of Ruin cast on you, because, you know, if you're playing like a deck that plays 5 different colors, you're probably playing some filter mana or some pain, just some mana that helps you produce other colors. So they would force you to shuffle that top card back into your library. So it's, you know, it's a 4 mana of 2/4. In constructed or in limited, it's probably an okay card to play if you can maybe try to pull off domain, but definitely domain's gonna be an interesting kind of ability to see how people really try to pull off that effect of playing multiple colors. This is just a very okay card to say the least. Next card up is gonna be Rith, Liberated Primeval. It's a 5 mana Naya color dragon that is 2 colorless, a red and a green and a white. Flying Ward 2, because other dragons we control have Ward 2 as well. And at the beginning of our end step, if a creature or planeswalker and opponent control would be dealt excess damage this turn, create a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. So yeah, this is a pretty interesting card, right? It makes other dragons, and those dragons then come into play with wards, so then making your opponent have to pay 2 additional mana to then specifically target that card. Itself also has Ward 2, and it's a 5 mana 5/5, so it's definitely not bad. It's just gonna be a matter of, are there gonna be enough dragons to really play around this to make this card like kind of like that over the top kind of thing. I would say if you're someone who plays the Alchemy, this is gonna be a card that definitely fits pretty well because Baldur's Gate has a lot of dragons. This is definitely a card that works in Baldur's Gate. Interesting to see how well this card will be in limited. Definitely another card you can play in like Commander. It's definitely an interesting commander because it's a 5 mana commander that lets you play red, green, and white. Lets you then you make like a Naya commander deck, which is definitely pretty cool. Gives all your dragons you would play in that deck then Ward 2, which is definitely awesome as well. And then on top of that, the fact that it you know, deals excess damage to a creature or a planeswalker, you get a 4/4 out of it, which is definitely sweet as well. So even if you just have to do that 1 point of excess damage, you get that dragon, which is definitely pretty sweet. Next card up is gonna be Ugg, the spawn of Turg. It's a 3 mana star 5, a double green and a double black and a green. Its power and toughness equal to the number of land cards in your graveyard. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top part of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard, and you can tap 2, sacrifice a land, and gain 2 life. This card is okay. Maybe seen play in limited, though it's really tough to mill yourself just because, you know, it gives you less draws because limited can go a little while. You never want to really mill yourself because you could lose the game quicker if the game goes long. And then in constructed, I don't know if there's going to be enough synergies to really get a lot of lands. There are a lot of things that, you know, benefit from having creatures in the graveyard, but as of lands, I'm not really sure. It's an okay card for 3 mana. It maybe comes out as like a, I don't know, like a 3/5, 2/5, depending on, you know, when this comes out. And then you can sacrifice and gain 2 life if you really, really need it. So it definitely does get better. Definitely an interesting card, but I don't know if this card is going to see a ton of play. Next card up is going to be Shield Wall Sentinel. It is a 4 mana 1/3 defender that when it enters the battlefield, we may search our library for a creature card with defender, reveal it, put it into our hand, then shuffle. So this is kind of like in that synergy of playing defender. There's a couple that have been revealed that get some additional effects based on how many cards you have with defender. This one maybe helps you search for maybe that one defender you're missing that maybe has that over the top powerful effect. You know, it's expensive. to say the least. 4 mana for only a 1/3. It's not great, but I guess it's a 1/3 that also fills your hand with another defender, so maybe helping you set yourself up, get just a bunch of big blockers on the battlefield. I don't really know. Unless you're really trying to maybe go that defender route, I don't really know if this card's really going to see a ton of play. Next card up is going to be Thrawn Portal. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer lands. So it's another like quick land that is kind of interesting. As long as it enters the battlefield, choose a basic land type. Its chosen type is in addition to other types. Mana abilities of Thrawn Portal cost 1 additional life to activate. So what this is saying is this is a land that comes in the battlefield that you comes in as essentially a colorless land. You choose a color. It then you change the land type. So if you are, maybe you're playing domain, this is like your domain land, right? So maybe you're missing, maybe you have like a red and a green. You need a blue. So this comes in as blue. And then the other thing too is if you were to tap this land for mana, you actually would tap it and pay a life. So it's a pain land, but it's kind of like a flexible pain land. It's kind of like a pathway where you choose what color you need at the time that comes in the battlefield, and then for the rest of the game, it's a land of that type until it leaves the battlefield. So it's an okay land. It's definitely an interesting land. This is kind of like maybe the land you're looking for if you're trying to maybe pull off domain. But yet again, it's another land where you pay some life and have to do an effect. So are you going to have enough life to really be able to survive how much possible life you'll lose in order to make that particular color? Next card up is we Nodule the Storm Runner. It is uncommon, 5 mana, 5/4 that you may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash. Whenever it attacks, you may pay 2. If you do, whenever you cast an instant or a sorcery spell, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. I think I already went over this card, but an okay card nonetheless. Definitely something you'll see play in limited, just because you could maybe play you attack, pay 2 when it attacks, and then kind of set yourself up for maybe like a double removal kind of effect. It's an okay card. It's 5/4. It's definitely something that, based on this card art, because it's like the alternate card art, you would think it's a dragon, but it's a Ifrit, which is definitely interesting, but still a cool card to say the least. Next card up is going to be Wingmantle Chaplain. It is an uncommon 4 mana 0/3 creature with Defender. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 bird white creature token with flying for each creature with Defender you control. So it's the white version of the card that gets benefits from other creatures that have Defender, and whenever another creature with Defender enters the battlefield under your control, you create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying. So it comes out initially, creates a bunch of birds, possibly if you have other defenders out, and then whenever additional defender comes out, you get more birds. So it kind of makes that defender deck then have some sort of aggressiveness, so not bad overall. Interesting kind of deck. I don't know if there's going to be some sort of mega defender that kind of synergizes them all together like Shrines would, but still cool to kind of see them kind of like keep this defender effect and kind of see maybe someone try to play like a 5-color defender deck, whether it's in standard, maybe in historic, or even explorer. Definitely kind of an interesting card to kind of see how it will overall work. Next card up is going to be Bog Badger. It's a 3 mana 3/3 creature with kicker of 1. That's a black. That when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, creatures you control gain menace in a turn. It's an okay card. I don't think it's a constructed card, but it's a pretty good limited card because giving your creatures menace is definitely pretty sweet. It's a 3 mana 3/3. Still really good overall. It's kind of like one of those ways to kind of make you attack him more aggressively, making your opponent commit double blockers to single creatures, which then maybe gets him more points of damage or maybe even finishes the game. It's still pretty good for 3 mana. Even getting a 3/3 for 3 is not bad in limited, though I don't think this will see much play in constructed. Next card up is going to be Lagamos, Hand of the Hatred. It's a 3 mana, a black, a colorless, and a red. 1/3. At the beginning of your combat of each turn, create a 2/1 red element. Create a 2/1 elemental creature token with trample and haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Tap it. Search your library for a card. Put it into your hand. Then shuffle. Activate only if you have 5 more creatures that died this turn. This is a unique card. It's a really tricky card because it is low toughness itself. It only creates 1 creature that would automatically die regardless. One way, whether it's attacking or just being sacrificed by its initial step. It'd be interesting to kind of see how people would get it to work to get other creatures, die in the process. Just because, eliminating 5 creatures but not eliminating this card in the process is definitely kind of tricky. If you have a bunch of small tokens, maybe you Meathook Massacre all your tokens, then be able to activate this. But yet again, it's kind of like you're almost sacrificing your board presence at that point just to kind of get a single card, whether or not that card is really going to win you the game at that point. But still, it's a pretty cool card to kind of mess around with it, kind of see what weird combo tricks you can kind of do. The only thing I can think of is maybe this is a card that goes in like Cat Oven, where you can maybe Cat Oven, Cat Oven, Cat Oven, Cat Oven kind of thing, and maybe try to get enough Cat Oven triggers. And then on top of that, if you combine that with like Mayhem Devil, maybe that's where you can maybe get enough things to point some damage somewhere, and then also then be able to search your library for a card. Kind of an interesting card, but yet again, I don't know if this is going to work in standard, but I do think I see more ways that could work in other formats. Next card up is going to be Karn's Silex. It's a 3-mana legendary artifact that enters the battlefield tap. Players can't pay life to cast spells or to activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. Tap X and tap it, exile it, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X or less. Activate only as a sorcery. So this card, if anything, in Constructed is more of, I would say it's something of a sideboard card, right? Just because, you know, it's definitely very pointed at paying life to do things. Or to activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. So it's definitely very pointed at people who are trying to do more than just, like, you know, like a cat oven effect. You know, paying life with Phyrexian mana. It's definitely got a lot of utility, but it's not like every deck's gonna be doing those type of things. And then on top of that, it's actually kind of like an interesting kind of like Oblivion Stone, Ratchet Bomb kind of effect, where you can tap X mana, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X or less, activate only as a sorcery. So it's like a kind of a 3-in-1. I understand why it's mythic. It's actually pretty decent. It does a lot, but it's definitely going to be kind of tricky. You know, is this going to be a card you're going to main deck? I don't know in Constructed, but I do think this is definitely a card if you're playing any sort of control deck or any sort of deck where you're really worried about certain sort of decks. This is definitely a card where you maybe want to add that, you know, as a sideboard card, sideboard it in. You know, you can pay 0 and tap it and explode a bunch of tokens, right? If they play a bunch of tokens in their deck in like a best of 3 style scenario. So definitely a card to kind of see and kind of wait and see how it prices. I actually can see this card being pretty decent in like limited in more of the older formats as well, just because it does quite a bit. Just because players do a bunch of things in other formats that that static ability outside of, you know, coming to battlefield tap is actually pretty good against. So it's definitely going to be kind of interesting to see how this card overall works. So definitely pretty cool to kind of see, you know, this card maybe pop up somewhere, but not really be a real big factor, I would say, in best of 1. Next card up is going to be Rada Drabik of Urbog. It's a 4-mana 3/3 zombie creature. It's legendary. It's a zombie wizard. It has vigilance and ward of 2. It gives other zombies you control vigilance that whenever another legendary creature you control dies, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a non-legendary, and it's a 2/2 black zombie creature token in addition to its other types. So far, only zombie I've seen that's been white. You know, with a white mana in it. It's definitely gonna be kind of interesting. Do you splash white mana in a zombie deck to play this card? Like, do you play mono black zombies with a splash of white for this card, making all your zombies that much stronger? Do you play, you know, this in just a Orzhov style deck, and then it just makes all your it makes all your creatures that would die maybe into zombies later, and then all of a sudden they all have vigilance? It's definitely going to be one of those things that's interesting. I just, you know, it's kind of weird to kind of see like a zombie that's not in the typical zombie colors that I would think when it comes to zombies currently in standard. It's still a pretty cool card. Definitely see some, you know, some zombie love, I guess, overall, even if it's like zombies aren't a main factor of the set, I would say. And then the last card up is going to be Timeless Lotus. It's a 5-mana legendary artifact that enters the battlefield tapped, and all it really does is it taps for 5 mana, 1 of each color. So I would say this card is kind of one of those cards that, if you're playing Domain, maybe this is a card that you would have in your Domain deck to kind of help you make the mana colors you need to maybe play those cards that have multiple colors. It's definitely a card that people are already, you know, pricing kind of high. I don't know if it's a card that would see play in other formats. Maybe it's a 5-mana mana rock in, like, you know, Commander or something like that. Maybe that's why the price is so high. It's definitely unique. It's just definitely expensive, I would say, right? You know, it's a little slow for standard, but it could be good in older formats, maybe formats that where things are a little bit slower. It's just cool to see them do some sort of, like, you know, thing that talks about like the Lotus, I would say overall. Just because Black Lotus is such an iconic card in standard, or not in standard, in Magic. It's kind of cool that they made a new Lotus to kind of like pay homage to it in the 30th anniversary. It's a cool card. I just don't think we'll see a lot of play with it when it comes to playing standard for the most part, just because that's kind of a lot of mana to invest in, especially in a very quick format, especially in best of 1. But with that out of the way, I mean, that is all the previews that I will go over today. You know, it's definitely, you know, we're getting close to Dominaria United at the time of recording. By the time you're seeing this, we're about a week out, which is definitely pretty sweet. I know these past 2 videos have been super long in the sense just because I've been going over all the cards that have been announced and whatnot. And like I said, you know, we're about 15 cards away from being fully, you know, spoiled for the rest of, you know, Dominaria United. So I'll probably just you know, absorb those cards in, and then, you know, if any of those cards stand out, they'll end up being in the video where I start talking about what cards you may want to craft, especially when it comes to rares, mythics, uncommons, commons, and things like that. I'll definitely get a better, you know, aspect of, you know, what's good, what's interesting, you know, what cards could be pretty good. It's definitely one of those things we don't really know how standard will rotate, just because unlike prior years, we haven't really been able to test like a rotation, you know, a post-rotation standard like we have in the past, where we, you know, typically this time of year we would have like a standard 2022 queue or a standard 2023 queue, where we have only the 4 sets that are available post-rotation until the new set comes out, really able to test around. So it's definitely one of those things that I feel like we missed it, but I guess it's one of those things where it probably costs too much development for them to really, you know, invest into, because they would have to then do it for standard, and then on top of that alchemy. But like, guys, if you like the video, hit that like button. It definitely helps out a lot. If any cards stood out to you in today's video, let me know in the comments below. If you're new here, you want to know if I post new videos like this one here on the channel, hit that subscribe button. And until next time, I'll see you in the next video. Just want to give a special shout out to the channel members here on my YouTube channel. You can also become a channel member yourself down below the video, hitting that join button. It definitely helps out a lot, and I just appreciate you guys for your support.